The sleet had been falling for 4 days straight, a miserable, freezing rain that turned the streets of Ethelberg to slick black ice. Caleb Vance had grown indolent, skipping his duties at the training grounds more often than not. He had recently fallen in with a few black market arms dealers, acquiring some exotic pieces. Things like pearl-handled pistols from a port city in the south and blades forged from rare alloys found only in the Western Territories. They were intricate, deadly toys. President Sterling, by contrast, was a model of diligence. No matter how frigid the morning, he attended every briefing and spent hours with his chief advisor, Hayden. He noticed Caleb's lax attitude and would offer a mild word of caution, appearing for all the world like a man who had truly turned over a new leaf. Caleb was pleased to see it. After a hunt at Aspen Ridge, he had 2 bucks sent to the presidential residence. Sterling, still unnerved by a previous incident involving some questionable game meat, had no appetite for wild things and passed the gift along to Hayden. With the annual state gala approaching, the capital was a hive of activity. The 6 federal departments and the 24 administrative agencies of the central government were overwhelmed. The president's own staff was shorthanded, and many decisions were being kicked up to Sterling himself. He was clueless about most of it, forcing him to constantly consult Hayden and the State Department for rulings. Seeing Caleb relatively unoccupied amidst the chaos, Sterling handed him a major responsibility: the complete audit and review of the Capital Defense Force rosters. Just like that, the entirety of Ethelberg's security fell squarely into Caleb's hands. He couldn't refuse and was immediately plunged into the same relentless flurry of work as everyone else. Julian Shaw, trailing Caleb from one end of the city to the other, inevitably had to cross paths with the Federal Guard. One day, Titus Kane finished his patrol shift. He hadn't even unstrapped his sidearm when he returned to the guard's sign-in office and saw Julian standing outside. He rubbed his scarred, frozen face and strode forward. Julian turned his head, watching Titus's aggressive approach. Titus stopped short, his voice a low rumble. He asked if Julian's father was General Shaw. Julian confirmed it. Titus then asked if he should be addressing his grievance to the father or the son. Julian replied that it depended on what the grievance was. Titus sneered, remarking that General Shaw had been nothing but ash for years, so of course, he was there to see Julian. He began to circle Julian, his words dripping with contempt. He commented that life in the capital was comfortable, judging by Julian's slender frame. He likened him to the expensive escorts on the city's east side, the kind that were softly bred on fine food and wine. Julian knew from his tone that this was not a friendly encounter. Nearby, Corbin said nothing. From the courtyard, other guards watched, anticipating a spectacle. Titus continued his tirade, describing Julian with crude precision, noting his fine features would make him a top earner at the Velvet Rope, the city's most exclusive brothel. He questioned why Julian would trade such an easy life to follow their commander through the wind and sleet. Titus stopped, his gaze sharp as a blade, and posed a final, venomous question. 5 years ago, General Shaw had betrayed the Northland's cavalry, preventing the Central Plains from becoming a wasteland under the Scourge Riders. He wondered aloud which part of their new commander Julian was now servicing in a similar fashion. He spat that the women who sold their bodies had specialized skills, talents they brought to their trade. He demanded to know what talent Julian possessed that earned him the right to stand among men who had actually fought in a war. Julian offered a faint smile and asked if the captain intended to confiscate his security pass and throw him out. Titus scoffed at the idea of such effort. He told Julian he was nothing more than a dog at the Federal Guard's gate, and that kicking him would be a compliment. He claimed that even speaking to him was a courtesy extended only out of respect for the commander. He advised Julian that since he had become someone's possession, he needed to accept the fact that he wasn't a person anymore. Julian stated that he wore the badge of a federal agent under the president's authority, carrying out official business. He questioned whose possession he could possibly be. He then turned Titus's insult back on him, suggesting that if he was a dog at the gate, then the soldiers were not so different. They were all just people drawing a government paycheck in Ethelberg, so they should all share the same understanding of their place. Titus, gripping the hilts of his twin blades, his eyes wide with fury, roared, demanding to know how Julian could compare himself to them. A real soldier. He declared himself a former captain of the Central Plains garrison. He took a sudden, menacing step forward, his voice thick with hatred. He spoke of the Chasm Creek disaster, of how his own brother had been trapped in that pit. He asked if Julian had any idea what that was like, to see men turned into human pincushions by 1,000 arrows. 40,000 men buried in a single mass grave. 40,000. Julian's expression did not change. Titus's voice cracked. He recounted how his parents were in his home state when the Scourge Riders broke through after General Shaw fled. The old, the weak, the women, all of them were abandoned. City after city was sacked. He described how his own sister was dragged for 2 miles by the riders and murdered at the city gates. Yet here Julian was, living a comfortable life, well-fed and well-clothed. He sneered that it seemed any crime could be forgiven if you were willing to offer your body. A bitter wind swept through the courtyard. Corbin sensed the situation escalating and knew it was too late to intervene. Titus grabbed Julian by the collar, his eyes red with unshed tears. He demanded to know how Julian dared to talk back when he was being reprimanded. He spat that people like Julian, born into wealth and privilege, could never comprehend how many had died in that war, or that even now, thousands were starving in the Central Plains. He asked if life in Ethelberg was good, if Julian slept well at night, knowing that others had paid for his pardons while the dead in the plains remained unaccounted for. Julian gripped Titus's arm and, with a sudden, shocking burst of strength, threw him to the ground. The impact sent a tremor through the onlookers, who all stumbled back. Julian scooped up a handful of icy slush, rubbing it between his hands. He looked down at the stunned Titus and asked how it should be accounted for. He said it should be settled among their own people. The Scourge Riders broke through. For a full month, as they advanced from Chasm Creek, General Shaw cowered and refused to fight. He told Titus that real men like him should have snapped the general's neck then and there and rallied the troops to defend their homes. Julian stood up. He said that being insulted and hated didn't hurt him. If spilling his blood would serve justice and quell the public's anger, then so be it. He spat lightly in Titus's direction, a malicious smile twisting his lips. He said it was all utter bullshit. The Scourge Riders were the ones who sacked the cities and slaughtered 40,000 soldiers. He told Titus that before coming after him, he should straighten himself out first and wash off the stench of the enemy's contempt. His life was worthless, he admitted, but he asked if his death would magically cancel the debt owed by the Scourge Riders. Titus shouted for him to stop trying to absolve himself, yelling that it was Julian's father who let the enemy in. "Then kill me," Julian said, tracing a line across his own throat with his finger. He urged him, begged him to do it quickly. "Kill me and the traitor's line ends." Titus surged to his feet, drew his twin blades and lunged at Julian. Toby, who had just woken up from a nap, stumbled into the courtyard and saw the scene. He cried out for Titus to stop, yelling that he was supposed to be guarding him. But Titus was beyond hearing, his blades carving arcs through the frigid air. Toby jumped, ready to charge in, but Gus caught him by the collar and held him back. Gus explained that Titus had lost his entire family in the Central Plains and that he couldn't be expected to spare Julian Shaw. Toby protested that it was all General Shaw's doing and had nothing to do with Julian. Gus hesitated, then said nothing more. Titus's blade slashed toward Julian's face. Julian pivoted, kicking Titus's wrist and deflecting the blow. Titus's arm went numb, and he lost his grip on the weapon. The knife flew through the air just as the flap to the sign-in office was lifted. Undersecretary Young's eyes widened in terror as the blade hurtled toward him. Corbin instantly raised his arm to catch it, but Caleb was faster. With a flick of his sheathed sword, he struck the knife, sending it spinning into a snowdrift. The steel blade buried itself deep in the frozen earth with such force that every guard in the courtyard dropped to one knee as if on command. "Commander, forgive us," they said in unison. Caleb ignored them. He returned his sword to its sheath and held the office flap open for Young. He offered a strained smile and apologized, saying his men were poorly managed and that he was sorry the undersecretary had been frightened. Young had no intention of staying. He muttered a few awkward pleasantries, hurried out of the courtyard, and climbed into his car, waving off any offers of an escort. He was gone in an instant. After seeing the official off, Caleb turned to face the kneeling men. Corbin, knowing his fault, quickly began to speak. He said it was his failure of supervision, but Caleb cut him off. He remarked that Corbin had certainly seen enough of the show. Caleb's hand fell heavily on his shoulder. He fed a piece of dried meat to his gerfalcon, perched nearby, and said only, "Ashton would never have let this happen." Corbin's face went pale. Caleb didn't berate him in front of the others. Corbin was his head of security, his right-hand man. He couldn't humiliate him publicly and strip him of his authority. But his words struck deeper than any physical blow. Corbin and Ashton were both top prospects scouted by Caleb's own father. Ashton was steady and had amassed a string of commendations serving with Caleb's older brother. He was a man few in Ethelberg dared to cross. Corbin had stayed behind at the family estate in the Northlands until he was finally assigned to Caleb 5 years ago. He was meticulous, and his greatest fear was being seen as inferior to Ashton. It was a rivalry between brothers in arms. Caleb's comment was more than it was a profound source of shame. "When I took this command 5 years ago, everyone told me the Federal Guard was a bunch of undisciplined thugs who had no respect for authority," Caleb said, stroking the falcon's feathers. "I can't lead soldiers like that. If you want to stay in this unit, you either shape up and follow the rules or you pack your bags and get out." Titus, his chest heaving, spoke with defiance. He said that what the commander said was true, and that they had always followed him. But he questioned Julian's place among them, asking what he was. He argued that, as a captain, his rank was several levels higher, so what was wrong with reprimanding him? He declared that he earned his pay, but he wouldn't grovel before some sellout. "He's wearing a federal agent's badge, and he's currently assigned to my personal detail. When you're sitting in my position, you can treat him however you like. That would be your prerogative." Caleb looked down at him. "You think you did nothing wrong?" "I did nothing wrong," Titus said, his neck stiff with pride. "Then why are you putting up with this bullshit?" Caleb said, "Leave." Titus looked up, his face a mask of disbelief. He asked if the commander was firing him over this person. "There are no personal vendettas in the Federal Guard. Don't try to spin this into some drama for my sake. I'm not doing this for anyone." Caleb's voice hardened. "I'm in charge here. If you can make your own rules, why bother calling me commander? Take off that uniform, hand over those blades, and you can settle whatever blood debt you want. If you can take him down in 3 moves, I, Caleb Vance, will get on my knees and apologize to you. But as long as you wear this uniform and carry this badge, you listen to me. All of you had a good time watching the show today, didn't you? Trampling on my authority, feeling all brave and righteous. What's the point of discipline then? Why not all just run off and be warlords?" The men kept their heads down, silent. The falcon, having finished its meal, stared at them with predatory eyes. Caleb continued, "You all love to whisper about how I'm decadent and incompetent. Fine. Today I'll act the part. Confiscate Titus's badge and show him the door." The guards cried out in unison, "Commander, calm your anger." Titus refused to back down. With trembling hands, he tore off his badge. He said he and the commander had been like brothers, and for 5 years he had been grateful for the commander's favor, willing to give his life for him. But he asked what he had done wrong today. If the commander wanted to wound his heart and fire him for the sake of some pretty face, then fine. Titus Kane accepted it. He placed his badge and helmet on the ground and bowed his head 3 times, striking the frozen earth with his forehead. Then he rose, stripped off his tactical vest, and, clad only in his undershirt, looked at Julian. "Serving on your back? Let's see how long you last," he snarled. "As for my debt, I'll settle it with those scourge bastards one day. But you won't escape either." Titus wiped his eyes and gave a salute to the men around him. "Brothers, until we meet again." He turned and walked away, truly gone. A fire blazed in the hearth, making the room uncomfortably warm. Corbin had been kneeling for nearly half an hour. Caleb sat in the main chair, reading a military history. Outside the door, the guard's other officers were also kneeling. Silence inside and out. There was an old saying, before a general's authority is established, it must first be asserted with a display of power. When Caleb took over the Federal Guard 5 years ago, he had done just that, establishing absolute command. In the years since, he had been fair with rewards and punishments. He never shorted the men their pay. In fact, he supplemented their salaries from his own funds. He was generous with his subordinates, but the greatcoat he wore was a gift from his sister-in-law, 3 years old. The recent victory at the Autumn War Games had given the Guard a taste of glory, eclipsing the performance of the 8 regular army divisions and bringing them unprecedented prestige. These soldiers, long suppressed in Ethelberg, who used to bow and scrape before the regular army, now strutted and boasted. It was not a good sign. Success breeds arrogance. Caleb needed an opportunity to remind them of their place, and Titus had provided it. Corbin didn't dare look up. Caleb tapped the table. He immediately rose to pour Caleb more tea. The cup filled, he knelt again. Caleb didn't speak a word all night, and so Corbin knelt all night. The unspoken rebuke was more damning than any tirade. The next day, Caleb had an early morning briefing. Dressed in his formal uniform, he told Corbin he wasn't needed today. Rest. Corbin's legs were numb. He pushed himself up from the floor, bowed his head, and said in a raw voice, "Sir." He always called Caleb Commander. The use of "sir" was deeply personal. Caleb did stop, but he didn't turn around. Corbin bowed again. "Please punish me, sir." Caleb gestured for the aides to leave. When they were alone, he finally turned to face Corbin. "If a man has done no wrong, how can he be punished?" "I was wrong," Corbin said, sweat from his brow stinging his eyes. Caleb was silent for a long moment. He said that for years, Ashton had been fighting alongside his brother on the frontiers, his rank climbing steadily. In 5 years, he would likely have his own command. He reminded Corbin that they were both chosen by his father as the best of the best. He asked why Ashton was earning such honors while Corbin was content to stagnate in Ethelberg, tethered to a dead-end assignment. Corbin's lips turned white. He swore he never thought such things. He said that Caleb's brother was his own man, but that Caleb was the one he answered to, the one he looked up to. He insisted that he and Ashton were family, and that their fortunes were tied together. "It's good that you understand that," Caleb said. "Fratricidal conflict, brothers turning on each other. That's a sign of rot at the core. You don't need an enemy to finish you off. You destroy yourself. While you've been with me in Ethelberg, Ashton has been looking after things back home. His sister married a State Department official, and you're the one who provides for her family during the holidays. You can compete on ambition, but you must acknowledge your shared duty. Passion and loyalty are what make a good man. What are you afraid of? What are you so anxious about? What happened yesterday, Ashton wouldn't have allowed it, because he has to protect my brother's reputation. You've risen to be my head of security, yet you still rely on petty tricks to win loyalty. For a moment of cheap satisfaction, you let my authority be trampled underfoot. You knew Titus was from the Central Plains. You knew, and you still assigned him to yesterday's patrol route, precisely so he could vent his anger. What's wrong, Corbin? Has your time with me been so degrading that you have to resort to these games to command respect? You were willing to sacrifice your commander's authority for a moment's thrill. Corbin, filled with remorse, lowered his head. I have failed you, sir. "You have failed yourself," Caleb said, his voice suddenly cold. "When you've figured things out, you can return to duty. For the next few days, Gus will be with me." Corbin remained kneeling, stunned, as he watched Caleb lift the flap and leave. Julian had finally gotten some sleep the night before. Now he stood by the armored car, his breath fogging in the cold air, watching Caleb's Gerfalcon circle in the gray sky. Caleb emerged and got into the car. Gus took the wheel and looked at Julian. Julian didn't look back. He saw the car door was still ajar and that Caleb was motioning for him to get in. Julian felt 1,000 needles on his back. The guards who had been kneeling in the courtyard all night were watching him. He smiled at Caleb and got in. Gus put the car in gear and it lurched forward. Caleb handed a silver flask to Julian. As Julian took it, Caleb brushed the back of his hand against Julian's. "So cold," he murmured. Julian pulled his hand away and leaned back against the seat, cradling the flask. Caleb observed that he didn't seem very happy. Julian warmed his hands on the flask. "I'm happy," he said. He looked at Caleb and smiled again. "The commander stood up for me." "I'm happy." "The commander didn't stand up for anyone," Caleb said. "That may be so," Julian said, "but now that you've established your dominance, when will you show some grace? My time as your bodyguard is running out. If you want to use me, you'd better be quick about it." Caleb just looked at him. Julian tilted his chin up slightly, a posture of feigned relaxation. He let out a breath and, after a pause, said that in the art of managing men, he was no match for Caleb. He remarked that Julian Shaw was a useful target, a convenient shield to have around. He could deter tigers and maybe even warm a bed. Such a versatile tool was hard to find. He complimented Caleb on his cunning. Outside, the city was alive with noise. Inside the car, the atmosphere grew heavy. They were only inches apart, yet separated by a chasm. When they arrived, Gus had the sense not to interrupt. Julian's hands were warm now. He placed the flask squarely on the small console between the seats and remarked that it was a pity. Caleb asked what was. "Everyone thinks you're having the time of your life every night," Julian said, his tongue tracing the edge of his teeth. His voice was a low, slow murmur. "But who would have known that Caleb Vance is such a paragon of virtue? Not only have you not had me, you haven't even tasted a drop of my saliva." He was about to open the door, but Caleb's hand shot out and hooked his belt. "That's right," Caleb said with a playful smile. "You're so eager for a contest in bed. I'll grant your wish." Julian replied that he didn't accept anyone with such a fierce look in their eyes. The door swung open, and he was gone. Caleb's fingers were empty. He flexed them, the feeling of the encounter still lingering. After the incident with Titus, the Federal Guard became less ostentatious. The men kept their heads down, reverting to their behavior from before the Autumn War Games. Corbin was now exceedingly cautious in all matters, no longer daring to turn a blind eye to insubordination. He had an old foot injury from his time in the Northlands, and in the harsh Ethelberg winter, it ached constantly during his shifts. One evening after dinner, Caleb tossed him a few jars of ointment. Corbin opened them back in his quarters and discovered it was a rare and expensive balm that Caleb's brother had obtained from a master physician years ago. A fresh wave of guilt washed over him, and he dedicated himself to his duties with even greater diligence. Meanwhile, Titus Kane had fallen on hard times. His own family was gone, but he had adopted 3 children from the Central Plains who depended on his salary. Unmarried, with no one to manage his household, he spent every cent he earned each month. Now, with his income cut off and the holidays approaching, food was scarce. He was an old soldier with comrades in Ethelberg, but he had always been the one helping others. He couldn't bring himself to borrow money now. He tightened his own belt to feed the children, but it wasn't a long-term solution. He was even considering working as a debt collector when Corbin showed up at his door. "The holidays are almost here," Corbin said, placing a thick envelope of cash on the table. "The commander remembered you have 3 kids at home." Titus turned away, sitting stiffly in his chair. He said that since he was no longer in the guard, he had no right to take their money. "You really are stubborn," Corbin said, his tone serious. "Still angry with the commander? All those men were watching and you attacked. You showed him no respect. A lack of discipline is a fatal flaw in an army. You were a captain for years, don't you understand that?" Titus asked what else he could have done. He said that every time he saw that man, Julian, he saw his dead parents. Corbin sighed. He said Titus shouldn't have insulted him so crudely, dragging the commander into it as well. He asked how Titus, after serving with him for years, could still be so reckless, not knowing the commander's temperament. Titus ran a hand through his messy hair. Corbin admitted his own fault, saying he knew Titus was impulsive and should have stopped him. A real man admits his mistakes and accepts his punishment. He questioned whether simply quitting was the mark of a true hero. "What else could I do? I already turned in my badge." Titus's voice was a mixture of grievance and sorrow. "I followed the commander for 5 years. I put my life on the line in the war games. The guard was finally getting some respect. And then I see that fox in and out of headquarters every day. I was worried. He looks the way he does, and I was terrified the commander's future would be ruined. I was anxious and I hate him." Toby says he did nothing wrong. Sure, everyone understands the logic. But who could really endure it? It was my parents and my brother who died, not some stray dog on the street. Corbin remained silent. Titus stamped his foot, roughly wiping his face. The scarred man was crying now as he recalled the past. He choked out that it's one thing to dislike someone, to feel uneasy when they're near, but this was a hatred born of blood. In the year of the Central Plains disaster, he told Corbin, every survivor was someone who had lost their family, who had escaped death by a hair's breadth. Who had any pity for them? He gestured around his squalid apartment. "Look at these 3 kids. They can barely write their names, and they're already orphans, survivors who clawed their way out from under the hooves of the scourge riders. We're all just disposable." Corbin patted his shoulder, waiting for him to calm down before speaking. "But you're in the Federal Guard now, and the commander is your sky. Titus, 5 years ago, when the commander cleaned house, he wanted to recruit veterans like you from outside the system. The Department of Defense refused. Do you remember what he said?" Titus's shoulders trembled slightly. Corbin continued, "You're still a soldier today, isn't it, because of what the commander said that day? Family debts are not yet paid. The nation's shame is not yet cleansed. One day, the guard will ride out beyond the borders, and then you can kill your enemies with your own hands. Won't that be more satisfying than blaming someone here today? How could you forget that after all this time?" Titus insisted he could never forget, not for a single day. He said he would give his life for the commander just for that chance. "Well, there you have it," Corbin said, rising. He pushed the money toward Titus. "Real brothers don't hold grudges. The commander sees us as brothers, and this money is from his own pocket. After the holidays, go back to your old unit. Put on a sergeant's badge and do your job." Titus was overwhelmed with emotion. He walked Corbin to the door. On his way out, Corbin saw Julian. They exchanged formal nods in the corridor. When Corbin went inside, Julian knew the matter was settled. Julian watched the snowfall, bored. Such a wolf, he thought, could truly be disguised as a lamb. And a fake lamb could become a real one. It was impossible to tell if the face Caleb showed the world was one of joy or anger, of genuine feeling or calculated deception. Corbin emerged again shortly. He held the door flap open, nodded at Julian, and informed him that the commander was waiting for him to join him for dinner. Julian turned and saw Caleb watching him. Fresh vegetables were a rarity in the Ethelberg winter, sold at exorbitant prices. Caleb had received a gift from President Sterling, so tonight's dinner included a dish of crisp, shredded cucumber. It was a simple, refreshing side dish. Caleb filled a bowl with hot soup and pushed it toward Julian. "You've been standing outside for a long time. Warm up, have a light meal, then rest." There's an old saying, Julian said, wiping his hands as he sat down. Unsolicited kindness is a prelude to treachery or theft. What does the commander require of me? There's much to require, Caleb said. Let's eat while we talk. They both picked up their forks. There was no one else in the room. 2 bowls of rice were quickly emptied. The plate of cucumber shared between them. Neither touched the main course of roasted meat. My mentor is coming to the capital for the holidays, Caleb said, sipping his soup. If your teacher, Mr. Kane, is available, perhaps the 2 old men could meet. A friendly gathering or a trap? You need to be clear about that, Julian said, putting down his silverware. My mentor does not play games. A friendly gathering, Caleb confirmed. The Kane family is down to just the 2 of them, and they haven't seen each other in years. Very well. I'll prepare a generous gift and ask my mentor to make an appearance, Julian said. He had finished eating. As he rose, Caleb said, You'll stay in my room again tonight. Julian turned back, a smile playing on his lips. Of course I won't run away. Shall we decide who bathes first? You take your time. I'll go ahead. He lifted the curtain to the inner room and went to wash up. Caleb had the table cleared. He stood by the window watching the snow fall. He turned his head and, through the hazy curtain, saw Julian's silhouette. Julian was taking off his outer jacket, like peeling away a rough husk to reveal the tender flesh within. As he lowered his head to untie his belt, the curve of his neck glowed in the orange light, a smooth canvas that seemed to beg for a delicate touch. Watching through the curtain was an exercise in frustration, magnifying and scattering the allure of a desire that had no outlet. It roamed through his limbs, making his whole body restless, sparking crude and violent thoughts. A man like Jade was nothing special. What Caleb found most captivating was Julian's desire. His eyes, the way he smiled. He seemed to be constantly, unconsciously broadcasting a sensual invitation. Come hold me. Come touch me. Come spend yourself completely here. This desire was like a fine mist, not aggressive, yet it seeped in unnoticed. And yet, Julian himself seemed utterly oblivious to it, maintaining a detachment that was the very opposite of sensuality. He effortlessly discarded this profound contradiction, leaving others to grapple with it. Caleb didn't want to think anymore. He keenly felt that this particular falcon would not be easily tamed, could only ever be its own master. He couldn't stand this version of himself, so easily provoked, so repeatedly stirred. Caleb turned back, closed the window, and went to the bathing chamber. Once again, they lay on opposite sides of the wide bed, separated by a bolster, back to back, their breathing even, as if they were asleep. Caleb's fingers toyed with the piece of shrapnel he wore on a chain. It wasn't his. It had belonged to Zale, a commander at the Skylock Pass. When Zale died in battle, he left it to Quentin Shaw. Quentin wore it when he became famous in the Battle of the Celestial Spire. The same battle where he shot and killed his own wife to prevent her from being used as a hostage to open the gates. The act turned Quentin's hair white overnight and broke his spirit. He had won glory, but the person he loved was dead. He could never again set foot on a battlefield. The hands that had achieved an unparalleled victory at the Spire could no longer hold a bow with confidence. As a boy, Caleb had trained under Quentin and asked him why he would kill his own wife. Quentin, polishing his bowstring, had asked, "Do you really want to be a general?" Caleb nodded. "Then don't start a family," Quentin had said. "A general dies in 100 battles. That's not the scary part. The scary part is that 9 out of 10 commanders will face an impossible choice. What you want and what you must bear are 2 different things." Quentin looked at his bow, his expression desolate, the prairie wind whipping through his white hair. "I hope you never find yourself in such a desperate situation. When a man reaches that point, no matter which way he chooses, he dies. You saved tens of thousands of people at the Celestial Spire," the young Caleb said, leaning on a fence. "Why didn't you accept the title they offered you?" Quentin had smiled. "Because I died in that battle. It wasn't until Caleb was in his late teens that he understood Quentin's words. In that battle, Quentin's beloved wife was captured. He had to choose between opening the gates and surrendering, or closing them and fighting to the last man. He chose neither. He rode out alone, drew his bow, and killed her. It was said that arrow was the steadiest of his life, a perfect shot from 1,000 paces. A torrential rain fell that night. No one knew if he cried out in agony. No one knew when his hair turned white. By dawn, when the enemy retreated, Quentin stood on a field of bones and collected his wife's body. From then on, the name Quentin Thunderfall Shaw became legend. Those who respected him would also curse him behind his back. To be so ruthless was monstrous to ordinary people. It was as if generals were born cold and heartless. Caleb treasured the piece of shrapnel, but he also feared it. He was afraid that one day he too would be trapped in a dilemma, which was why he never spoke lightly of affection. Corbin, who had been with him for so long, still didn't know his preferences. What wine he liked, what food he enjoyed, what clothes he preferred. The truth was so mixed with falsehoods that no one could sort it out. The Northlands. It seemed only those two words were the undeniable core of his being. He had already tasted what it was like to be controlled by desire. How could he seek out more trouble for himself? Caleb sat up silently and looked at Julian. He raised his hand. With a little more force, he could strangle this desire where it lay. Julian was trapped in a nightmare. His brow was furrowed, his temples slick with cold sweat, his back damp. Caleb leaned over him and saw a side of Julian he had never witnessed before. Julian was drowning in a tide of blood, soaked through. He touched him. It was blood. This dream repeated night after night. He felt he was going mad. Julian suddenly convulsed, his tightly pressed lips slowly parting as he mumbled something in his sleep. He was so helpless. Caleb was jolted from his deep-seated apprehension by something else. He studied Julian, like a great beast observing its prey. Julian was not invincible. Beyond their unspoken tests and wariness, there was a more indefinable, shared suffering. Julian felt exhausted. He no longer cried out in his dreams, no longer clawed desperately at corpses. He recognized the nightmare for what it was. He knew his mentor was dead. Faster, Julian urged, like a detached observer. End it faster. He was brutal, sinister, demanding. He even wanted the blood to flow thicker, the snow to fall harder. How else could this nightmare be portrayed? He was fearless now. His flesh and bone had been soaked through and rotted away. He was a wild dog feasting on carrion. Filth and hatred were merely proof that he was alive. Julian's eyes snapped open. He shot a hand out, pressing it flat against Caleb's chest. In a few short moments, still sweating, he asked calmly, "Can't sleep?" Caleb's chest was hot. Through the thin fabric of his nightshirt, he could feel the iciness of Julian's palm. He said he'd eaten too much. Julian noted that a person with a weaker constitution would have been scared to death, waking up to find a face looming over them in the dark. "I heard you calling me," Caleb said, his expression unchanged. "Had to make sure you weren't cursing my name." "I don't curse you in my dreams," Julian said. The heat from Caleb's body was scalding his fingertips. He tried to pull his hand back, but Caleb pressed it firmly in place. "Are you cold?" Julian's temples were still damp. He smiled faintly. "Yes, I'm so cold." He was once again the seductive creature, and he didn't care in the slightest whether Caleb was enticed or not. It was a natural talent of his, a wicked gift. Caleb gripped his hand, pinning it to the headboard. In the dim light, he inhaled Julian's scent. "You climb into my bed knowing full well what I think about every night. You call me formidable, Julian Shaw, but you're the formidable one. What's to be done about that?" Julian's voice was still a little hoarse. He sounded unconcerned. "I haven't done a thing. I want to," Caleb whispered, leaning over him. "I want to find another way to kill me," Julian said, letting him hold his wrists. Dying in bed is so undignified. I've changed my mind. Caleb used his free hand to brush Julian's damp hair from his face, appraising him like a jewel he had just purchased. I don't want you to die. Julian advised him against biting his neck. Julian, Caleb breathed his name like a sigh. It was a half-joke. If I don't bite, will you spare me? Julian looked up at him. Caleb asked if teasing him was enjoyable. Immensely, Julian said, feeling Caleb's body pressing closer. Watching a little wolf, helpless and pathetic, brings me great joy. Then we can be even more joyful, Caleb said. The Dowager Empress is biding her time. What did she promise you? Throw it away, Julian. I'll give you more. Julian laughed. I'm guessing freedom isn't part of your offer. Caleb, you never seem to realize your desires are written all over your face. Right now, you want to lock me up, don't you? I want to forge a golden chain, Caleb said. It's a shame for a neck like this to go unadorned. Leashes were originally used for wolves, Julian said, their breaths mingling. I want to forge a golden chain too, to put around your neck. I'd pull it every time I wanted you to speak. Don't, Caleb raised an eyebrow. You couldn't afford it even if you spent your entire salary. Their noses were almost touching. Caleb's piece of shrapnel pressed against Julian's wrist, leaving a red mark. Since we're already, Caleb began. Julian tilted his head up and kissed him. A soft touch of lips, tinged with a cool mockery. Do you want to go insane? Julian's eyes were wild. He whispered, do you dare? Tear me apart, try it. I don't care. The tightly wound string inside Caleb snapped. The surging tide broke free. Driven by mockery and incitement, he pressed down on Julian, kissing him back as if to devour him. Lust mingled with killing intent, hatred tangled with pity. Between the two of them, who was more hateful, who was more pitiful? Their wet kisses were a tangle of tongues. Caleb kissed Julian, and Julian met him with everything he had. The sounds of their mouths were obscene, desire incinerating two broken people. Caleb's hand, which had been gripping Julian's wrist, suddenly released it. He slid it under his back, pulling him up into a seamless embrace. Hate each other. Stain each other with your own filth. Let hatred become an unbreakable thread. Living like this was too painful. The howls in the darkness were heard only by oneself. Better to tear at each other, to become a bloody, brutal kind of reliance. This life was already ruined. Clothing was pushed aside. Skin like moonlight was cool to the touch. There were no caresses, only tearing. The thick night dissolved into a pool of spring water. Caleb cupped this water, struggling to push himself up from the tide of passion. In the space between breaths, he saw Julian's eyes. There was not a trace of warmth, of surrender, in them. They merely reflected his own absurd actions. A thrill like a knife's edge shot through Caleb. He needed Julian until he was warm, until the water churned. He held Julian in his arms, pressing down heavily, licking and biting wantonly. He bit the back of Julian's neck as if drinking a magic potion. The night was drenched, the sheets soaked with sweat. Limbs tangled, they tossed on the bed. Caleb gradually found pleasure in the hurried collisions. He was a fast learner. He surrendered in that soft cloud, then grew hard again within it. He silently pressed against Julian's core, pushing until Julian swallowed with difficulty. His neck exposed and arched. Caleb kissed that neck, lifting Julian's knees. He was no longer a hypocrite pretending to be virtuous. He was a mortal man thrusting into the darkness. He made Julian forget the pit of Chasm Creek and made him unable to forget this violent union. Neither of them had a lifeline. This night was a release from suffering, pleasure like a consuming fire. Julian reached for the headboard. Caleb pulled him back, locking him in his arms. Come on, run wild, Caleb whispered in his ear. You wanted me to go insane. How dare you run? You wanted to see who was more ruthless. I'm not afraid. Julian's cheek rubbed against the sheets. His eyes closed as he panted. The look of pain and overwhelming sensation on his face was an intoxicating invitation. How did he come to look like this? Caleb gripped his chin and kissed him, giving him no quarter, no rest. In the moments when his hips went numb, Caleb soaked him through. Julian was still trembling from the aftershock when Caleb, without pausing, flipped him over and pushed inside again. The winter wind howled outside, a counterpoint to the suppressed gasps in the darkness. Caleb, slick with sweat, kissed Julian again and again. He didn't want to admit defeat, but he had already been vanquished. Caleb fell asleep. His ferocity and anger softened in his features, leaving only a trace of rugged displeasure. He held one of Julian's wrists, the two of them huddling together in the winter night. The brutal kisses transformed into a searing warmth. The snow fell all night, light as willow catkins, without a sound. Just before dawn, Julian pulled his wrist free. Caleb's fingers twitched, following him in the bedclothes. Outside the door, Corbin saw Julian emerge. "The training ground," Julian said succinctly. Corbin nodded. As he stepped aside, he noticed the cut on Julian's lip. He started to speak, then stopped. Julian glanced at him, reading his thoughts perfectly. The reassignment orders for the federal agents should be coming down in a few days. "Thank you for your care during this time." Corbin began to say something about the other day. "What's past is past, no need to mention it," Julian said, his mood inexplicably cold today. "We'll all be working in Ethelberg. We're bound to run into each other. I will act with caution, and I advise you and the rest of the Federal Guard to do the same." Corbin froze, but Julian smiled. The good days the Guard is enjoying now weren't easy to come by. But fortunes turn. Who can say what the future holds? Before Corbin could reply, he had thrown on his coat and left. Toby brushed the snow from his shoulders. He was hanging upside down from a ledge, dangling in midair, a pen in his mouth, frowning at Julian's retreating back. Corbin saw him and asked what was wrong. Toby said, "Don't you think he seemed a little sad today?" Corbin glanced at the corner where Julian had disappeared. "Really? He seemed fine to me. He was even smiling." Toby pulled a small notebook from his shirt and, still hanging, scribbled a few notes. He mused that it was probably because of the fight with the commander last night. He'd heard quite a commotion. Corbin looked slightly embarrassed. He glanced up and called out, "Gus, haven't you taught this kid anything about the world? He's 16 now. Back in the Northlands, he'd already be married." Gus didn't answer. Corbin called again. "Did you hear me?" "He's wearing earplugs." Toby stuffed his notebook back in his shirt, flipped himself upright, and pulled a cotton plug out of Gus's ear. "Goose, Corbin's calling you." Gus startled, almost slipping from his perch. He pushed Toby's face away, peered over the edge with a frown, and asked what was going on. Corbin pointed at Toby. "Get rid of him. Sell him and use the money for your drinks this month." Gus wrapped an arm around Toby's neck. He wouldn't fetch more than a few coins. A sound came from inside. All three fell silent. A moment later, Caleb emerged. He was pulling on his shirt, his eyes scanning the area before landing on Toby. "My brother is coming to the capital in a few days," Caleb said, a slight pain in his lip as he spoke. He pressed his tongue against it, then quickly stopped. "Don't report any trivial matters." Toby nodded vigorously, like a chick pecking at grain. Caleb paused for a moment. "What are you still doing here?" Toby scratched the back of his head, confused. He looked at Corbin, then at Gus, then back at Caleb. "Sir, I'm on duty today," Caleb said. "And the person you were supposed to be watching?" He left," Toby stammered. Caleb said nothing. Corbin brought his horse over. Caleb swung himself into the saddle. As he was about to leave, he pointed at Toby. "Throw him out." Toby was still trying to mount his own horse. He didn't have time to react before Corbin and Gus grabbed him. He was terrified, clutching his little notebook. "No, sir, please. I haven't done anything wrong lately. He was unceremoniously tossed out of the gate. Corbin returned to Caleb's side. "Sir, your mentor is scheduled to arrive today." Caleb didn't say a word. He spurred his horse and rode toward the city gates.